on this video and remind yourself, of course, what you're supposed to do for these videos. You have the review number 2 paper. You're going to watch the video before the designated class block. No excuses. Do any activities immediately after you watch the video. So do those multiple choice questions and then bring in your completed activity, your blocked essay, any questions you might have to the next class, and you will take a quiz on this material. So review number 2 covers about the 1800s to about 1945, the impact of the Industrial Revolution, the four main causes, which you already know are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. We're going to look at World War I and the impact of the Treaty of Versailles, the interwar years, the Great Depression, the rise of dictators, and World War II. The theme for this particular time period could be nationalism, and it's a really good theme for the thematic essay or from the DBQ. But later in this video, we'll talk about what you'll do to block this type of nationalism essay, which is really an individual's essay or a people's essay. All right, let's do some review. The defeat of Napoleon and the Congress of Vienna. This is a little silly cartoon that shows you Napoleon rises to power. He has some great successes like reforming the banks. He builds an empire. He puts all of his relatives on the throne. Then he invades Russia, which is really a mistake. Then he falls, and then the leaders meet at the Congress of Vienna to restore order and to give a balance of power, and conservatives win. So, balance of power, legitimate monarchs, and contained France. Very conservative. This is going to set up the power play for the 99 years before the outbreak of World War I. Those are 99 years of relative peace, and they do help Europe thrive at this time, but they cannot stop the power of nationalism. Nationalism in Italy is really comprised of these three men. This guy here is Giuseppe Mazzini. He's the heart. This guy is Camillo Cavour. He is the brain. And this man here with his red shirts is Giuseppe Garibaldi, the sword. It takes three men plus King Victor Emmanuel II to unify Italy, to push out the Austrians, and to really manipulate the French as well. And once Italy is unified, it is no longer a geographic expression. It is now a whole country unified under the Italian flag. Germany, we know Otto von Bismarck and his funny hat. He is a Prussian. He is of the Prussian nobility. He doesn't really care about liberalism or conservatism. What he cares about is unification. And so he uses this idea of blood and iron, war, trickery, and he also leads the people of Paris to eating rats, which isn't nice, when he attacks the French in the Franco-Prussian War. And he really uses this idea, like I said before, of realpolitik. You're going to do whatever is necessary to achieve your goals. In Africa, the Europeans use it as their natural resource playground. And the Berlin Conference, led by Otto von Bismarck, shows that combination of imperialism and industry. The industrial powers wanted to have raw materials, markets for their goods, and cheap labor was a bonus. So the Berlin Conference did not invite any Africans to the conference and decided the fate of the African nation, or African continent, and decided the boundaries of those African nations. In Asia, the Europeans basically carve up China into spheres of influence. This is after the Opium Wars, where Great Britain literally smuggles drugs into China. The Chinese say no, the English say stop us. The wars are mainly at sea. England wins, and then there's just a series of unequal treaties where Great Britain, Germany, Russia, France, Japan even all divide up China into spheres of influence, which are these special trading areas here listed here, and China loses control of itself. And it's going to be known as the Century of Shame. The Boxer Rebellion is an attempt to get those foreign devils out of China. They literally say, foreign devils get out. They do kill some Christian missionaries and others, but they're put down by a multinational army. Like the Sepoy Mutiny, the Boxer Rebellion is seen as a push towards nationalism and a push towards getting the foreigners out. In the Middle East, we have the beginnings of Zionism, the belief that Jews should have a homeland and that homeland should be in Palestine, aka the Holy Land. The man who starts this, really leads this cause, is Theodor Herzl in the 1890s. It's going to take a while for Zionism to come true, not until after the Holocaust, after World War II. And so we have imperialism in all of these areas. Africa, the scramble for Africa, the Zulu uprising trying to defeat the Europeans and it doesn't work. We have in India, of course, the British East India Company, then the Sepoy Mutiny, then the colonialism of India, and then the restriction of India. And an example of that is the horrible Amritsar massacre, and then Gandhi's rise to nationalism. In Asia, Japan is going through the Meiji Restoration after Commodore Perry. They're starting to really militarize and modernize and westernize. They beat the Chinese in the Sino-Japanese War. They beat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. And they start to embody the four main causes. In China, you have some rebellions like the Taiping and the Boxer. That's after the Opium War and the unfair treaties of Nanjing. And in Europe, we have this idea that they feel better than everybody that is not European. Rudyard Kipling expresses these viewpoints in his poem White Man's Burden. And you also have the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. In World War I, we have the first modern war because of industrial weapons. We also have total war, which includes men, women, children, elderly, livestock, everything. Everyone's in the war, everyone's affected by the war. Machine guns are probably one of the most important inventions. Blimps like the hydrogen Zeppelin, poison gas, submarines, the Germans called them U-boats, grenades, siege guns, those big, huge tanks with big guns on them, trench warfare that really causes stalemates, and of course, airplanes. The Treaty of Versailles blames Germany for World War I, makes Germany pay reparations, makes Germany lose their land, and makes Germany disarm. And this is going to be so harsh that when Hitler basically refuses to abide by it, he gets away with it. Remember the Treaty of Versailles, France wants revenge and reparations, England wants colonies, Italy wanted land. Wilson, he wanted peace, 14 points of peace. He doesn't really get that, but he does get the League of Nations. Unfortunately, the United States never joins the League of Nations. We never signed the Treaty of Versailles. And the League of Nations, not just because the United States isn't involved, but because of the way it was constructed, is very weak and is unable to stop the dictators as they march through Europe and Asia. This just shows some cartoons about this idea. This one says, and they are the leading members of the League of Nations to promote world peace. And this is the United States back here, not joining the League of Nations. And you see seeds of future wars are being sowed because nobody's stopping them. And then, of course, Wilson here, and we've looked at this cartoon in class, this idealism bubbles in the League of Nations and how he had great ideas, but he was very idealistic. I'd like to think of him more as pretty smart, but nobody was listening to him. The Russian Revolution is a huge part of World War I because it shines a light on Russia's problems. And Russia's problems are Tsar Nicholas II is completely inept as a ruler. He cannot rule Russia. There's shortages of bread and other supplies. There's a lack of military technology. They were not industrialized, and so they could not compete with the German military machine. And 2 million Russians are dead by 1915. So the Bolsheviks come to power led by Vladimir Lenin, and they promised the most important promises wrapped up in 3 words: peace, bread, and land. Peace, we'll get you out of World War I. Just join us and be a communist. Work together, and we will make this utopia built on Karl Marx's theories expressed in the Communist Manifesto. Not only will we give you peace, we'll give you bread, we'll give you what you need, and land, redistribution of wealth. Of course, this leads to Lenin signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which gets the Russians out of war and decides that when Germany wins World War I, they'll divide up Poland. But Germany doesn't win World War I, so Poland does not get divided up yet. Then there's a civil war between the Reds and the Whites, and then Lenin gains full power, and he rules like a dictator. Unfortunately, what he sees economically is that he needs a little capitalism. And like Mikhail Gorbachev at the end of the Soviet Union, Lenin promotes the NEP, the New Economic Policy, near his death, where he promotes some private ownership, especially among the peasants who own land or who owned land before. He introduces some capitalism because the economy wasn't doing well. Unfortunately, we'll never know if that would have lasted because when Stalin comes to power, he gets rid of that and forces people to join collective farms. And so we see the rise of the dictators between World War I and World War II. Benito Mussolini calls his party the Fascist Party. He comes to power in 1922. He's very charismatic and he's anti-communist, and he's a nationalist, extreme nationalism. That's what fascists are. Of course, Hitler is our most famous fascist, and of course, he wrote the book Mein Kampf in jail after the beer hall putsch, where he tried to him and his Nazi party tried to overthrow the Weimar Republic, which was the first democracy of Germany, because of that hyperinflation, because the costs of everything were just getting so out of hand. And that was 1922, 23 really. And so he goes to jail, but he only serves under a year, but he writes that book Mein Kampf, where he lays it all out. And so by the time the Great Depression hits, he uses the Great Depression to his advantage to gain power and becomes chancellor in 1933. And then a non-fascist, a communist, Stalin, comes to power after Lenin, and he does those 5-year plans, collective farms, he'll send you to a gulag, he rules with censorship, he controls education, he is a mastermind of propaganda, and luckily he does industrialize the Soviet Union a little bit more so that they can fight off the Nazis. But before he fights off the Nazis, he signs the Nazi-Soviet Pact with Hitler, which allows him to really buy himself time to organize. Okay, so let's look at this. One similarity between Russia under the Tsars and the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin is that in both types of government, these leaders tried to reduce their nation's influence in world affairs, developed policies to limit industrial growth, supported the creation of a national church, or established an authoritarian form of government. Of course, establishing authoritarian or totalitarian might be a choice as well. The Russian peasants supported the Bolsheviks in the 1917 revolutions mainly because the Bolsheviks promised to establish collective farms, maintain the agricultural price support program, bring modern technology to Russian farms, redistribute land owned by the nobility. Redistribute land. You're looking for peace, bread, and land. The harsh conditions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I helped lay the foundation for the rise of fascism in Germany, uprisings during the French Revolution, division of Korea along the 38th parallel, Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Of course, it's rise of fascism in Germany. In Eastern Europe after World War I, the greatest obstacle to national unity in many nation-states was the great ethnic diversity found in the region, economic dependence of Eastern Europe on Japan, acceptance of democratic traditions by most Eastern Europeans, expansion of United States influence. The ethnic diversity could have been a plus, but it's really a negative. And most times when you see ethnic diversity without a strong ruler or group, it leads to problems. Which policy best demonstrates appeasement? Was it the British policy towards Germany during the 30s, the Japanese policy towards China in the 30s, the Spanish policy towards Native Americans during the 1500s, or the German policy towards the French during World War I? Of course, that's the Munich Conference, 1938. The British gave in to Germany when Hitler said he only wanted a little part of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland, but if you give a mouse Czechoslovakia, he'll take the whole thing. The treatment of Jews in Europe during World War II and of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire are examples of cultural diffusion, fundamentalism, modernism, or genocide. Unfortunately, genocide. Major result of the Nuremberg trials, not to be confused with the Nuremberg laws. Was it that national leaders were held personally accountable for war crimes against humanity? The State of Israel was created as a home for victims of the war. That soldiers were required to pay for the property damages they caused during the war. That prisoners from all countries were immediately released from captivity. National leaders were held personally accountable, of course. Major cause of World War I, a decline in the policy of imperialism, the existence of opposing alliances, an increase in the acts of aggression by England, or the spread of communism. They're trying to trick you here. So read carefully. Of course, it's two. The Balkan region was referred to as the powder keg of Europe before World War I, because the aggression of the Ottoman Empire was disrupting the balance of power, because Yugoslavia was invading its neighboring countries, because of nationalistic and imperialistic rivalries were increasing, or because the area was the leading supplier of military equipment for the rest of the world. Always go with the four main causes, and this has two of them. Let's look at this theme of nationalism. It says to select two individuals who engage in a nationalist effort, and for each, describes the historical circumstances that cause this individual to lead the effort, so causes, discuss how this individual attempted to promote nationalism, discuss the extent to which this person was successful. So you've got Elizabeth I, she's ninth grade, she's not going to be on there. Toussaint Louverture, we did talk about, Simon Bolivar. Those are two Latin American revolutionaries. Camille Cavour, the Italian unification, Otto von Bismarck, the German unification, Sun Yat-sen, democracy, capitalism in China before Mao, Mohandas Gandhi, of course, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam, Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran. I think your best bet would be Otto von Bismarck and Mohandas Gandhi. Okay? So let's say, if I was going to do historical circumstances, what's happening before Otto von Bismarck? Well, Germany's not unified. Germany wants to be unified. They want the Austrians out. They want to be connected. There are revolutions. There are industrial revolutions happening, and Germany wants to be a part of that. Change was needed because Germany felt connected. And so Prussia takes that and rolls with it. And Bismarck uses those ideas of realpolitik. He doesn't care about a label, he cares about unification. And he unifies through blood, war, 3 of them, and iron, industry, and growth of military technology. And he fights with Denmark, he fights with Austria, and he fights with France. And when he fights with France, he's brutal, allowing the people of Paris, France, to get close to starvation and be reduced to eating rats, which really foreshadows what's going to happen when Germany invades in World War I and in World War II. The French and the Germans are not going to have a great relationship. Extent of success, Bismarck is extremely successful. He modernizes, he industrializes Germany, he pulls it together. And by World War I, even though Bismarck is no longer in power, Germany is an amazing force to be reckoned with during World War I. If we go with Mohandas Gandhi, the historical circumstances, what was happening before? Oh my, the British rule, the British Raj. They controlled the Indian people. They ruled through a divide and rule concept, although the Indian people were already divided by the Hindu caste system and between Muslims and Hindus. People were upset because they were taxed without representation. They were controlled. The British government promised that the Indians could serve in World War I and World War II and then get freedom or independence or at least some control of their own government, but that didn't happen. So Gandhi is the man who is the symbol of activism. He uses boycotts like the homespun movement. He uses marches like the Salt March. He makes speeches. He goes on hunger strikes. He goes to prison. He uses civil disobedience and nonviolence. First he works in South Africa, then he works in India, and he becomes the face of Indian nationalism. The extent of Gandhi's success, well, India does get its freedom from Great Britain. Unfortunately, Hindus have a long road to equality of treating the untouchables better and really getting rid of the caste system. It's illegal to promote the caste system in India today, but it's still present. And Pakistan and India were partitioned, they were split, and that really upset Gandhi. He wanted all Indian people to live together. And so Pakistan became more of a Muslim country, and India became a Hindu country for the most part. And so, yeah, they get their independence, but they're rivals, Pakistan and India are. They both have nuclear weapons, they both see the world a little differently, and yet they're so connected as people. So it's a little bit of a bittersweet victory. And then, of course, Gandhi is assassinated by a fanatical Hindu for making peace with the Muslims. And so, it's a tough road. So both of these individuals lead their countries, but there's consequences in both cases. Okay, I hope that helps. Good luck to you.